They laughed when they put the cuffs on him, a quiet single dad, a veteran who never spoke about his past. But inside that courtroom, when a 4-star general walked in and froze at the sight of him, everyone realized they weren't looking at a criminal. They were standing before a legend the nation had forgotten. Missouri. 7:42 a.m. The sound of a zip tie was the loudest thing on the street. Bella Brooks held her breath as 2 police officers yanked her father's arms behind his back. The sound of plastic tightening around his wrists felt louder than the birds chirping, louder than the gas pump clicking nearby, louder than her own racing heart. Daniel Brooks. "You're under arrest for assault." One of the officers barked his voice, dry, bored, almost amused. "You have the right to remain silent, though from what I hear, that won't be a problem for you." People watched, some through windshields, some from the diner across the street, coffee halfway to their lips. And then there were the ones filming. Bella, just 11 years old, but with eyes far older, stood frozen next to the family's beat-up Ford truck, her hand still gripping the Gatorade she was going to give her dad. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Daniel didn't speak. He didn't resist. He didn't even blink. His weathered face lined by sun, and time remained calm. Almost too calm. One of the officers leaned close to his partner. "This the guy from the news thread, ex-military, supposedly special forces." "Yeah," the other muttered, tightening the grip on Daniel's shoulder. "Claims to be some decorated vet. PTSD, probably." Snapped. Just a matter of time. Daniel said nothing. Bella's voice cracked louder this time. "He didn't do anything. That man tried to grab me. My dad just..." "He pushed him away," the officer sneered. "Little girl, there's a victim in the ER and your dad's on camera, pushing." "Save it for the judge." Daniel finally turned his head, locking eyes with Bella. A soft nod. His lips moved silently. "It's okay." But it wasn't. And she knew it. The courthouse in Oak Ridge, Missouri was a relic, brown brick faded seal, and a metal detector that beeped more from rust than weapons. Daniel Brooks, still silent, was escorted through the side entrance and into holding. Cameras were already waiting outside. Local news vans buzzed like flies. Social media posts were going viral: veteran attacks, man at gas station. Mental breakdown, dangerous single dad, finally loses it. And yet no one asked what had actually happened. Inside the courtroom, Bella sat alone in the back row. Her legs barely touched the floor. She clutched a small, worn keychain, an old Eagle insignia, once part of Daniel's military gear. It was all she had left of the man people now whispered about as a threat. The prosecutor, Caleb Dunn, stood with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. Hair neatly parted, tie spotless, voice like a salesman in a courtroom suit. "Your Honor," he said. Addressing Judge Clarissa Bennett, the state charges Daniel Brooks with felony assault and endangerment. This defendant is a former military operative with no fixed employment, unstable emotional behavior, and per the footage, a willingness to use violence in public. He turned, glancing at Daniel, who sat quietly in his chair, no lawyer by his side. Worse, he refuses to speak. He's made no effort to clarify or defend his actions. Silence, Your Honor, in this context, is not strength. It is menace. Judge Bennett peered over her glasses, stern, controlled, the kind of judge who didn't blink at press pressure. But something in her gaze said she was already halfway convinced. She looked down at the man in question. "Mr. Brooks," she asked, "do you wish to request a public defender?" Daniel didn't answer. Caleb smirked. "The state interprets that as further demonstration of disregard for the process." Judge Bennett raised a brow. "Or trauma." She paused, sighing. "Very well. We'll assign temporary counsel for advisement. Bail is denied until further review. Next hearing is in 48 hours. The gavel struck. The room buzzed with murmurs. Bella stood up, wanting to scream, wanting someone, anyone, to ask her what happened. But no one turned. No one saw her hand shaking as she tucked the eagle keychain back into her pocket. A local man, Daniel Brooks, was taken into custody earlier this morning. Video footage shows what appears to be an altercation outside of a gas station. The victim, unnamed, has sustained minor injuries. Sources say Brooks is a decorated veteran, but has kept a low profile in Oak Ridge. Some neighbors describe him as cold. Others say quiet, helpful, just a little odd. Cut to a blurry cell phone clip, Daniel standing still. His large frame intimidating under the gas station lights, a man on the ground, groaning. Narration: could this be another case of a veteran slipping through the cracks? In the holding cell, Daniel sat on a concrete bench, back straight, hands clasped. He'd been through worse, much worse. Iraq, Afghanistan, Fallujah. But this was different. Not because of the cuffs, not because of the concrete walls, not even because of the headlines. It was Bella. The last time he saw her eyes like that, she was 3, clutching his leg as he boarded the C-130 for a mission that would nearly take his life. Now, her eyes held fear, not of war, but of the world, and that cut deeper than any bullet. He closed his eyes. Let them laugh, he thought. Let them judge. The truth always finds its way out, even in a courtroom filled with silence. Missouri County, Courthouse Day. 2. The courtroom smelled like old books and quiet judgment. The second hearing began under gray skies and heavy air. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it felt full. Full of whispers, glances, assumptions. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the press had already drawn their own conclusions. Daniel Brooks sat in the same chair posture, still impeccable. His hands rested calmly on his lap. Zip ties now replaced with cold steel cuffs. He hadn't said a word since his arrest. No lawyer sat beside him. The judge, Clarissa Bennett, a woman in her early 60s with steely eyes and a mind like a metronome, stared at Daniel for a moment longer than protocol required. She'd served on the bench for over 20 years, seen everything from petty thefts to cartel murder trials. But something about this case, about this man, made her hesitate just a breath longer than she should have. Mr. Brooks, she began, her voice sharp, but not unkind. This is your second appearance. You have been offered the assistance of public counsel. You have refused to speak, and you continue to remain unrepresented. I must ask again for the record, do you wish to speak silence? The courtroom waited. Caleb Dunn, the prosecutor, crossed his arms and leaned slightly back, savoring the moment. Judge Bennett cleared her throat. Very well. The court will proceed. 11-year-old Bella Brooks sat in the second row of the courtroom legs, swinging off the bench, her fingers wrapped tightly around the eagle keychain clipped to her backpack. She looked tiny in the tall wooden pews, alone. She watched every move her father made, every blink, every breath. She knew him, knew that stillness didn't mean indifference, it meant calculation, restraint, patience forged in fire. But no one else in the room knew that. To them, her father was the silent, stoic ex-soldier with a temper and a record, a ghost, a threat, a headline. She whispered, "He's not saying anything because you never asked the right question." Caleb Dunn stood, clean cut. Harvard Law. One of those prosecutors who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He addressed the court like a man auditioning for something more than justice. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing to the jury panel being considered, "we must not mistake silence for innocence. Mr. Brooks has chosen not to deny the charges. The surveillance video clearly shows him striking the alleged victim. Witnesses claim they saw him behaving aggressively. And while he may wear the badge of military service, It does not grant immunity from accountability. He paced deliberately. We are not here to try a soldier. We are here to try a man who chose violence on a civilian street. He turned dramatically to the bench. The people rest pending admission of video evidence. Judge Bennett's fingers tapped against her gavel, not impatient, curious. She looked down at the pre-trial documentation. No priors, no complaints, no criminal record. She squinted at the defense file. It was practically empty. The only page of note, a single faded resume from over a decade ago. U.S. Army, Special Operations Group, confidential assignments, honorable discharge. Then her eyes flicked to Bella. Small, silent, not even crying. Just waiting. Like she knew something no one else did. Outside the courtroom, headlines were already spinning. Veterans Breakdown, or Hidden History. Silent soldier refuses to speak. What's he hiding? Where's his lawyer? Where's his story? They didn't care that the video was low resolution, that the audio was missing. That context had been cut. What mattered was how it looked, a large man in a jacket grabbing someone mid-motion, a man falling, a child screaming. Headlines wrote themselves. But inside, the silence grew heavier. Chloe Carter, 29. Junior field reporter for the Missouri Gazette, sat near the back. Unlike the others, she wasn't there for the headline. She was there for the truth. And the truth had a smell, a weight, a presence. And something about Daniel Brooks didn't sit right with the version being sold. Why would a man with his record choose silence? Why take the public shame? Why protect a story that could easily be told? She scribbled in her notebook, if he's guilty, why not deflect? Why protect his image when it's already being destroyed? She glanced at Bella. The girl didn't fidget, didn't cry. She waited, as if she knew something the world didn't. Judge Bennett adjusted her glasses. Before adjourning, she said slowly, I would like to note for the record that the defendant, Mr. Brooks, has not formally accepted or waived legal representation. He remains unresponsive. The court is compelled to assign public counsel for the sake of due process. However, she hesitated. I remind the prosecution that the burden of proof lies entirely with the state, not with the silence of the accused. She struck the gavel once, recessed until Monday. The room exhaled. Daniel was escorted out. He didn't look at anyone except Bella. One glance, one small nod. And then he was gone again. As reporters filed out, Chloe Carter lingered. She pulled out her phone and Googled Daniel Brooks' military record. Nothing. She switched to deep archive searches. Still nothing. Then she typed into a Federal Leak Archive forum, anyone ever heard of a special ops vet named Daniel Brooks Fallujah, 2007. Call sign, she hit send. Nothing came back. Yet. But something told her. The silence wasn't empty. It was intentional. 3 days after the arrest, Oak Ridge, Missouri. The whispers started small. At the diner on Main Street where Daniel once fixed a broken freezer without asking for a dime. At the hardware store where he used to help old Mr. Langley load lumber into the back of his truck. At the school parking lot where parents who used to wave now kept a few feet more distance from Bella. Heard he snapped. PTSD, maybe. He's always been a little off, hasn't he? I mean, who lives that quiet for over a decade and doesn't have something to hide? Rumors travel fast in small towns. But judgment travels faster. And Daniel's silence gave them space to fill in the blanks however they wanted. Judge Clarissa Bennett sat in her private chambers reviewing paperwork. The courthouse was quiet, save for the sound of rain tapping gently against her office window. She leaned back in her leather chair, rereading Daniel's file again for the 4th time in 2 days. Something didn't sit right. No priors, no psychiatric evaluations, no history of substance abuse. A veteran, a father, a mechanic. The only thing unusual about Daniel Brooks was how unusually silent he remained. She flipped through the small folder again. Only 3 documents inside. A copy of the incident report, a standard psychological intake form, unsigned, and that same 1-page resume with a vague line, classified operations, Army Special Forces 2002-2009. She set the file down and rubbed her temples. After 2 decades on the bench, she knew when a man was hiding guilt. But Daniel, he wasn't hiding guilt. He was hiding something else entirely. In the school cafeteria, Bella sat alone. Her tray of macaroni and fruit cup went untouched. At the next table over, 2 kids whispered, loud enough to hear, quiet enough to pretend they weren't trying to hurt her. My mom said he probably killed people overseas. My dad said maybe he went crazy. You know, like in those movies, Bella clenched the eagle keychain in her palm until her fingers hurt. She stood, quietly, walked past them, didn't say a word. Just like her father. Chloe Carter tossed a dozen printouts onto her desk, frustrated. She had filed requests with the Department of Defense, tried back-channeling through retired military contacts, even reached out to veterans forums, but still nothing. Daniel Brooks's service record was sealed so tightly, it was like he didn't exist. No record of commendations, no post-service interviews, no discharge notes made public. It's like his file stops on purpose, she muttered to herself. Her editor walked by. Still chasing that vet story. Yeah, and the silence around him is louder than any scandal. Well, keep at it, he said with a shrug. But if he's guilty, all this digging won't change a thing. Chloe stared at her notepad. What if he's not hiding guilt, but protecting someone else? 3 men waited for haircuts, while the radio played soft country music in the background. As usual, talk turned to town gossip. You know, I served with guys like him, one older man said, stroking his chin. Quiet, steady, didn't flinch, even under fire. But when they came back, some just disappeared into themselves. Yeah, the barber added. But this ain't Afghanistan. This is Oak Ridge. We've got kids walking these streets. Can't afford to let a time bomb walk around just because he wore a uniform. The 3rd man, a veteran himself, looked up sharply. You think a man like that, who raised a girl alone, kept to himself, never took credit for anything, just snapped one morning without cause? You ever see how he held her hand crossing the street? That ain't the grip of a man ready to explode. That's a soldier still protecting his last mission. Silence fell over the room, and then the barber quietly changed the subject. Daniel was brought in through the side door again. Still no lawyer. Still silent. Judge Bennett looked at him with narrowed eyes, not unkind, more like a woman trying to read a locked diary. Across the room, Caleb Dunn flipped through his notes, preparing for the next escalation. Then a soft shuffle. Small footsteps. Bella. She stood from the gallery, walked down the aisle with a paper in her hand, eyes wide but brave. Your Honor, she said, voice trembling. Bennett blinked. Yes, sweetheart, I know I'm not supposed to talk, but I want to read this. Please. The courtroom stiffened. Caleb scoffed. Your Honor. But Bennett raised a hand. Let her speak. Bella unfolded the paper, her hands shaking. My name is Bella Brooks. My dad is not scary. He's quiet. But quiet isn't bad. He never yells. He fixes things. He makes me pancakes with chocolate chips on Sundays even when he doesn't eat any. He walks me to school every morning. He fixes people's cars and doesn't ask for money. He tells me stories about birds and trees and stuff no one notices. The man who hurt me at the gas station grabbed my arm. My dad pushed him away. He didn't punch him. He didn't yell. He just stopped him. And now he's being treated like he's the one who did something wrong. My dad doesn't talk much because people never listen. But he loves big. And I know it. Please, don't believe he's bad just because he's quiet. Silence filled the room. Real silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the weight of truth, dropping like a stone in still water. For the first time, even Caleb Dunn hesitated. Judge Bennett didn't respond right away. Her gavel hand hovered, then slowly lowered. She looked at Daniel, and for just a flicker, less than a second, he looked back. Not a glare, not a plea, but a gaze. And in it, something unspoken passed between them. A memory, a name, a truth too heavy to carry in words. Oak Ridge, Missouri. 1 week before the arrest. The air was crisp that morning as Daniel Brooks stood under the hood of a neighbor's stalled Chevy, the collar of his faded olive jacket turned up against the breeze. His hands, though calloused and weathered, moved with the precision of a man who once disassembled rifles blindfolded. Fuel lines clogged, he muttered mostly to himself. Across the yard, Mr. Petrowski, a retired plumber and longtime neighbor, shuffled toward him with a coffee mug in hand. "Was gonna call a tow truck," the old man said, squinting. "Didn't think you'd offer." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Tow trucks are expensive," Petrowski chuckled. "You sure you didn't work logistics in the Army?" Daniel didn't reply. He just grabbed a socket wrench and kept working. It wasn't the first time he'd helped someone without being asked. He never stayed for coffee, never accepted $1, and never said more than he had to. But in Oak Ridge, that silence was starting to feel suspicious. At Chuck & Son's auto shop, Daniel used to work part-time before the pandemic. Chuck Sr., a man who'd spent his life covered in grease and stories, remembered him well. "Kid knew engines like he was born with a carburetor in his crib," Chuck said, leaning against the garage wall, cigarette in hand. "Didn't talk much, but he could strip down a transmission before you even got your hands dirty." His son Barry nodded. "We never got complaints. He showed up on time, worked hard, helped the younger guys without making them feel dumb. But then he left." Chuck added, flicking ash to the ground, said he needed more time with his daughter. Barry raised a brow. "You think he's guilty?" Chuck was silent for a long time. "Then I think we stopped asking the right questions when men like him came home." Bella Brooks kept a small spiral notebook under her bed. It wasn't for homework or doodles. It was a logbook. Her logbook. April 3rd. Dad fixed Mrs. Carson's porch steps. Didn't charge her. April 7th. Dad picked up trash at the park after the Little League game. April 10th. Dad gave the stray cat some chicken, even though we didn't have much. It was her way of making sure the world didn't forget the quiet things her father did, because she'd already learned that adults only remembered what was loud. At the Oak Ridge Public Library, Ms. Connolly pulled out a library card with a quiet smile. Daniel Brooks. He and his daughter come in every Thursday. She told Chloe Carter, the young reporter still digging for clues. He checks out books on birds. Nature. Once he borrowed a field guide on wild medicinal herbs. "Odd for a mechanic, isn't it?" Chloe asked. "Not odd," gentle Ms. Connolly replied. He never raised his voice, even when Bella dropped coffee on his boots last fall. She paused. "I've seen men who bottle rage. Daniel bottles pain. There's a difference." Chloe sat in her car that night with the windows down, scrolling through her own notes. No military record accessible. No formal complaints. No outbursts. No credit taken for anything. Respected by some. Suspected by others. Loved deeply by one. She had the beginnings of a profile, if not for a suspect, then perhaps for a ghost. A man who walked softly enough to be forgotten. Until he wasn't. Her editor had asked her for a one-liner for the next headline, but she couldn't settle on one, because she couldn't decide what kind of story this was yet. 2 counties over Bernard Callahan. A Vietnam vet watched the news coverage of Daniel Brooks with narrowing eyes. He didn't know Daniel, but he knew that look, the posture, the restraint, the 1,000-yard stare that wasn't cold, it was calculating. Bernard turned to his wife. I've seen that man before. She frowned. We're not him. That look. It's the look of a man who did more than what's on the record. A man who never asked for a medal because the truth couldn't be told. Back in the modest home Daniel shared with Bella, the living room was bare. 2 chairs, 1 lamp, and a bookshelf lined with faded paperbacks and military field manuals. In the bottom drawer of the nightstand, buried beneath Bill's and Bella's drawings, was an old wooden box with a broken latch. Inside, a worn patch from a Delta unit that didn't officially exist. A photograph of 6 soldiers kneeling in desert sand, faces blurred, one of them holding a rifle with Daniel's initials carved in the stock. And a folded letter signed by a 4-star general dated 15 years ago. You saved more than lives that day. You preserved an entire mission. Your name may never be spoken, but your sacrifice will echo in every breath this country takes in freedom. Daniel had never shown that letter to Bella, and he didn't plan to, because the truth wasn't something he needed anyone to praise. He just needed it to stop haunting his daughter. At the next hearing, as Daniel entered in cuffs once more, the gallery was half full. Not because more people cared, but because more people doubted. The rumors had taken root. In whispers, in online forums, in grocery store checkouts. Judge Bennett watched him enter and glanced at the paperwork on her desk. She saw the silence, but she also saw the strength it took to hold it. And she couldn't help but ask herself again, what kind of man lets the world misunderstand him unless he's protecting something more important than himself? Arlington, Virginia, Department of Defense. Headquarters, 12 a.m., Monday. General Charles Dalton, 4 stars glinting on each shoulder, strode into the secure wing of the Pentagon's Eastern Corridor with a cup of black coffee and a schedule booked by men half his age. He didn't slow for anything except the war dead. Each morning, no matter the briefing, the calls, the noise, he stopped at the memorial wall. A quiet salute, a moment of breath for those who never came home. He'd buried soldiers, commanded operations most senators never even heard about, lived through 3 administrations. But today, it wasn't the ghosts of the fallen that would pull him back. It was a name. It started as a headline in the Defense Watch Bulletin: Missouri veteran arrested after assault outside gas station. Dalton almost scrolled past it. He hated how the media paraded veterans as broken tools, when convenient forgotten heroes when not. But a blurry photo caught his eye. A man in handcuffs, long hair, broad frame, calm eyes. Something old inside the general stirred. He clicked the link. Name, Daniel Brooks. His hand froze over the keyboard. Not because the name was familiar, because it had once been classified. Dalton's assistant entered moments later, clipboard in hand. Sir Colonel Brenner's on the line about the international. Cancel it. Dalton interrupted, eyes never leaving the screen. Cancel, sir. I need 10 minutes. Secure channel. Now. Dalton opened a hardened drive from his private archive, something only 2 people in the building had access to. He typed in an authorization code, scanned a retina, the system unlocked. A single folder Spectre, Operation Sand Veil Fallujah Sector 9. Inside it a mission brief from 2007. Team call signs, KIA reports, photographs, and one name redacted across multiple documents, but not on the final page. Operative Spectre 1 Brooks Daniel. Assigned Tier 1 Long-Range Reconnaissance, Precision Neutralization. Dalton leaned back, the memory rushing in like a wave. It had been a bad op, a trap. The convoy hit an IED 2 clicks outside Fallujah. Dalton, then a 2-star, was in the rear vehicle. When the dust cleared, his men were bleeding, scattered, exposed. Snipers had zeroed in. 2 men dropped before anyone could return fire. Then silence, followed by a whisper in his comms, I have them. 6 shooters. Rooftop, 15 seconds. Then 6 shots. No echo. No panic. just surgical, terrifying precision. When extraction arrived, the rooftop was empty. Only later did Dalton get the name of the ghost who had saved him. Daniel Brooks, a man who refused all commendations, a man who never showed his face again. Until now. Dalton stood abruptly. He picked up the phone. "Get me a car." "No driver. I'm heading to Missouri." "Missouri, sir, for a local incident." "No," he said flatly, "for an American disgrace." The prosecution had ramped up. Caleb Dunn, sensing public support, pushed harder. The media narrative painted Daniel as a dangerous loner, a decorated but damaged man. Headlines now read, "Decorated but derailed. Daniel Brooks refuses to speak." Is silence a sign of trauma or guilt? Justice delayed by a veteran's denial. The town began to fracture. Some defended him, others feared him. Bella, always seated behind her father in the courtroom, felt the world shrinking around them. But Daniel's expression never changed, not even when Dunn described him as a powder keg with military training and no accountability, not even when the judge ordered a psychological evaluation due to continued non-responsiveness. Daniel just sat, silent. But his silence was not surrender. It was waiting. In a small cafe off Main Street, Chloe Carter stared at her laptop in disbelief. Her latest DOD request had been denied again, file sealed. National security interest. But that answer in itself was the breakthrough. She cross-referenced the words Brooks Spectre 1 and Fallujah 2007. Only one document pinged, an anonymous forum post from years ago. There was a guy they called Spectre, came out of nowhere, took out 6 hostiles like it was nothing. No name, no patch, just a rifle and a mission. Never met him. But they say even the brass saluted him. Chloe's heart pounded. She looked at the blurry courtroom photo again. That calm, still man in cuffs. She whispered to herself, "Who are you, Daniel Brooks?" That evening, under the fading Missouri sun, a dark military SUV rolled quietly into Oak Ridge. No flags, no convoy, just one man inside. 4 stars on his shoulder, a name already echoing through the records, and a debt 18 years old, still unpaid. General Charles Dalton stepped out of the vehicle, coat buttoned, eyes focused. He did not head to a base. He headed straight for the courthouse, and he did not come to observe. He came to stop something before it was too late. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. 9:01. Ayor. The courtroom was full, but the silence felt like church. The third hearing began like the others. Daniel Brooks was let in, wearing the same plain olive jacket now wrinkled from overnights, in holding. His expression hadn't changed, still stoic, still unreadable. Some said cold, but others saw something else. A man weathering a storm without asking for shelter. The air in the courtroom felt different today. Tense, like something unspoken was waiting to break. Bella sat quietly behind her father again, eagle keychain in hand, chin lifted just enough to show she wasn't afraid. Not today. Caleb Dunn, as usual, came ready to press the advantage. He adjusted his navy tie and approached the bench with a confident stride. "Your Honor, the people would like to submit additional character testimony gathered from local citizens, several of whom have expressed concern about Mr. Brooks's unpredictable behavior." He held up a folder dramatically, including one anonymous statement that claims Mr. Brooks once shouted at a neighbor's dog for barking. There were snickers in the gallery. Judge Clarissa Bennett leaned back in her chair, unimpressed. "Are we prosecuting noise complaints now, Mr. Dunn?" "Of course not, Your Honor. Merely painting the psychological profile of a man who may not be criminal, but who is clearly unwell." Daniel didn't flinch. Then something happened. Not scripted, not expected. Bella stood up, in the middle of the courtroom, alone. She walked to the center aisle, her feet echoing faintly on the tile floor. Chloe Carter, seated nearby with a pen poised above her notebook, froze mid-stroke. Judge Bennett blinked. Young Lady Bella looked up at her. "I want to speak." The judge frowned. "You're not on the witness list." "I know," Bella said, her voice trembling, "but I have something to say." "Please." Caleb Dunn scoffed. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Sit down, Mr. Dunn," Bennett said sharply, surprising even herself. She turned back to Bella. "Proceed." "Briefly." Bella nodded, then stepped forward to the witness box. Her legs were shaking, but her eyes were steady. She held the eagle keychain tight like it had power. She faced the courtroom and the world that had painted her father as a threat. "My name is Bella Brooks," she began. "And I know you all think my dad is scary, or broken, or dangerous. But he's not." She swallowed hard. "He's quiet. I know that makes people uncomfortable. He doesn't say things unless they matter. He doesn't smile unless he means it. And he doesn't talk about his past, not because he's hiding something bad, but because he's protecting something sacred." Somewhere in the gallery, someone coughed. Another person leaned forward. Bella continued. "When I was little, I used to have nightmares. I'd wake up screaming. I thought monsters were real. But Dad never told me there's nothing there. He just sat with me until I fell asleep. Because he knew the monsters were real. Just not the kind kids imagine." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You think he's dangerous because he pushed a man who grabbed me. But I was there. I saw it. That man tried to yank me away. My dad stepped in between us. He didn't throw a punch. He just stopped it. And now everyone is acting like he's the bad guy." She took a deep breath. "He doesn't defend himself because he doesn't think people would listen. But you should. Because if you saw the way he makes pancakes in the shape of animals, or fixes my shoes with fishing line, or picks up worms from the sidewalk so they don't dry out." She paused, voice catching. "You'd know the truth. He's not scary. He's good." The room was still. Even Caleb Dunn didn't move. Bella looked at Judge Bennett. "Please, don't punish him for being quiet." Judge Bennett said nothing for several long seconds. Then she leaned forward. "Thank you, Bella." That took courage. Bella nodded and returned to her seat. She didn't cry. She just looked at her father. Daniel looked back. And for the first time in weeks, something flickered across his face, a crack in the armor, a twitch in the corner of his mouth. Maybe not a smile, but something close, something grateful. Of course, Caleb Dunn wasn't about to let a child's speech undo his case. He stood. "Your Honor, while the testimony is heartfelt, the people remind the court that emotion is not a substitute for evidence. We have video footage, hospital records from the victim, and a defendant who refuses to testify or cooperate." He paused dramatically. "Children love their parents. That does not absolve the law." Judge Bennett sighed. "No, it doesn't. But it does remind us that the law should never be deaf to why something happens." From her bench near the back, Chloe Carter scribbled frantically in her notebook. The girl breaks the courtroom not with facts, but with truth. Why won't he defend himself? Not guilt. Not shame. Something else. She flipped to a blank page and wrote one line. "The silence is starting to speak louder than any defense." The hearing recessed 15 minutes later. Daniel was let out in cuffs again, but something had shifted. People weren't laughing anymore. They watched him differently, like maybe they hadn't been told the full story, like maybe they were the ones who hadn't asked the right questions. Bella stood by the door as her father passed. He looked down at her. Then just for a moment he whispered, "Thank you." 2 words, spoken so quietly only she heard, but it was enough. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. Day 4 of hearings. 10:48 a.m. Rain tapped against the tall windows like an impatient spectator. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of justice. It felt like a glacier. Still. unforgiving, waiting to crack. Daniel Brooks sat unmoved, chained more by the narrative around him than the cuffs on his wrists. His hair had grown longer in holding. His knuckles showed signs of stress, white from how tightly his hands were folded. He hadn't spoken a word in 4 days. Not to the judge, not to the press, not to his court-appointed attorney who had stopped showing up after Daniel signed a formal waiver of representation, written in neat, controlled block letters. He would represent himself. He would say nothing. Judge Clarissa Bennett stared down at Daniel with a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. Behind her composed expression was a storm of doubt-duty and something bordering on guilt. Silence in a courtroom was usually a tactic one used to conceal, confuse, or control. But with Daniel, it didn't feel like a tactic. It felt like a vow, and it was making the case colder by the minute. Caleb Dunn, now dressed in an aggressively sharp gray suit, had grown increasingly agitated by the shift in public sympathy after Bella's speech. His closing arguments in today's segment were designed to reframe the narrative with force. He stood confidently before the courtroom. Your Honor, the people submit this isn't a story of silence born of nobility. It's a story of a man using trauma as a shield against accountability. He stepped closer to the jury box. You've seen the footage. You've heard the testimony. A man shoved violently outside a gas station. Medical records show a sprained wrist, bruised ribs. Witnesses say Mr. Brooks said nothing, showed no remorse. He turned, slowly pacing. And when given the opportunity to speak, he refuses. No apology. No clarification. Just this. Posture of stoicism. But silence is not a virtue when it endangers others. Silence can be used to hide the truth. He pointed at Daniel. And I submit to this court that Mr. Brooks is hiding. The 12 prospective jurors, still in pre-selection observation, whispered to one another as the arguments rang out. He just sits there, one murmured. I want to know what he's thinking. Another whispered, I'm not sure he's dangerous. He just looks sad. Even in their private deliberations, no one could agree on what Daniel Brooks represented. A ticking bomb or a sealed vault. From her usual seat behind the defense table, Bella stared not at her father, but at the room. The way they looked at him was changing. Not with fear now, but with suspicion, the dangerous kind. The kind born not of facts, but of frustration. They wanted answers. And Daniel's silence was no longer mystique. It was fuel. She held the eagle keychain tighter. Say something, Dad, she thought. Please. Just once. In the back, Chloe Carter kept typing furiously. She'd been piecing together breadcrumbs for days, and one small thread had just unraveled something big. The anonymous forum post, the redacted documents, the military contact who finally responded with a one-line email. If the name Brooks appears next to the word Spectre, do yourself a favor. Close the file and forget it. She didn't forget it. She printed the forum thread, highlighted the phrase 6 shots, 4 minutes rooftop Fallujah. Then she cross-checked it with an archived report from 2007, an article that briefly mentioned a surprise extraction of General Charles Dalton, then a 2-star from a near-fatal ambush during a convoy raid. No shooter was ever identified. No award was given. Just one line in the post-op summary: Overwatch extraction made possible via classified asset. Operation sealed by Executive Order 13494. Her hands trembled as she whispered, You were there, weren't you? She looked at Daniel. Suddenly everything made sense. After lunch, recess, Judge Bennett returned with an announcement. Due to the defendant's continued silence and waiver of counsel and following prosecutorial motion, I am considering escalation of charges to aggravated assault with intent. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Bella froze. Even Daniel blinked just once. Caleb Dunn nodded triumphantly. Judge Bennett added, This decision is not final. A ruling will follow tomorrow. And with that, the courtroom was dismissed. But before anyone could rise, 2 uniformed MPs entered the back of the room, dressed in dark green, no insignia, no name tags. They walked in unison, precision, purpose. The gallery turned. Even Caleb lost his smirk. And then, a third man entered behind them, tall, square-shouldered, wearing a full-dress uniform. Silver eagles glinted on the collar. 4 stars on each shoulder. General Charles Dalton. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just walked, slowly, calmly, until he stood at the back of the courtroom, eyes fixed on Daniel. Judge Bennett stood instinctively. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help?" Dalton raised a hand. "Ma'am, I'm not here to watch." He nodded toward Daniel. "I'm here because I owe that man my life." And just like that, the courtroom froze. The tension didn't break. It shattered. Oak Ridge County Courthouse, 2:07 p.m. It wasn't just silence. It was reverence, confusion, and fear, all colliding in one long breath. General Charles Dalton stood at the rear of the courtroom like a marble statue brought to life. His uniform was flawless, not parade-starched, but mission-sharp. His face, though lined with age and command, held a solemnity that made even the loudest doubter go still. He walked forward. Each step echoed on the courthouse tiles like a drumbeat to something ancient, something sacred. Judge Clarissa Bennett remained standing, stunned. Her gavel, for the first time in years, trembled slightly in her grip. "Sir," she said cautiously, "this is a restricted proceeding. I need to know who I know exactly where I am." "Your Honor." Dalton interrupted calmly, his voice a low thunder. "And I know exactly who I'm speaking for." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and placed a sealed envelope on the bailiff's desk. "Pentagon authorization, level 5. Even Caleb Dunn looked rattled. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, unsure whether to keep typing or wait for the reality to catch up. Dalton turned to the courtroom. This man, he pointed to Daniel Brooks, once saved the lives of 13 American soldiers, including mine. Not with a rifle company. Not with backup. Alone. On a rooftop. In the middle of Fallujah, 2007. The name of the city alone stirred a ripple through the gallery. I was a 2-star general caught in an ambush during an unsanctioned extraction of a CIA asset. We were dead in the sand. Snipers had us pinned, and no air support was coming. But someone was. He looked down for a moment, not for drama, but for control. 6 shots in 4 minutes. Surgical. Silent. Spectre 1, they called him. No one knew his name. His identity was sealed. His record buried. Because that's what Tier 1 operators sign up for. He looked toward Judge Bennett again. "Daniel Brooks is Spectre 1. Gasps erupted. A woman in the gallery whispered, "My God." For the first time, Daniel moved. Not dramatically, not proudly, just a breath. A slow blink. His hands unfolded slightly. He looked not at the general, but at his daughter. And then, softly, he spoke. "I told them to seal it. I didn't want her growing up with that shadow." The room collectively turned toward the sound of his voice. It was low gravelly, not from age, but from years of disuse. Dalton nodded, eyes soft. That shadow kept us breathing. Judge Bennett sat down slowly, eyes wide with the weight of what had just unfolded. She opened the envelope and read the documents inside. It was stamped by the Department of Defense, signed by 2 Joint Chiefs, and marked Declassification. Exception granted. Emergency court disclosure only. She looked to the court. This court recognizes the arrival and sworn testimony of General Charles Dalton. Given the classified nature of the documents presented, I am placing this proceeding into temporary closed session. She banged the gavel once, but the courtroom didn't move. Because no one could. The prosecutor stood visibly pale. Your Honor, with respect. This changes context, not culpability. The assault Dalton turned to him. His voice was calm, but there was no warmth. Son, if you had a shred of tactical sense, you'd recognize a protection maneuver when you see it. Daniel Brooks didn't assault that man. He neutralized a threat. Controlled force, zero overreach, no lethal intent, just like we trained him. Dunn sat down. Hard. From the gallery, Bella broke. The tears she'd held through courtroom after courtroom now flowed freely. But they weren't fear or sadness. They were release. She stood and ran right past the bailiff, right past the pews, and wrapped her arms around her father's waist. Daniel didn't speak. He just dropped his head against hers and whispered, I'm sorry you had to find out like this. She clung tighter. I don't care who you were, she said through sobs. I know who you are. Chloe Carter, frozen in the back row, couldn't write. For the first time in her young reporting career, words failed her. The silence wasn't just Daniel's anymore. It was the court's. It was the system's. It was a nation's moment of reckoning with the way it forgets its quietest heroes. One by one, men in the back rows began to rise. Old Marines, Army engineers, Navy corpsmen. Most didn't know Daniel personally, but they knew him. One saluted. Another removed his cap and pressed it to his chest. And then they all followed. A quiet wave of respect, not asked for, but earned. Dalton stood in the center of the courtroom once more. I was told not to come, told to let the process play out. But justice isn't process, it's truth in motion. He turned to Judge Bennett. And you, ma'am, now hold a man's legacy in your hands. Don't let it rot in silence. Then he turned to Daniel and saluted. Slow, deep, final. Daniel didn't return it. He just nodded. The kind of nod soldiers give each other when the mission is finally over. Closed courtroom session. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. No media, no murmurs, just the truth unfolding. The doors were locked, the blinds were drawn. Everyone remaining had been vetted. And for the first time since this case began, the courtroom wasn't a stage. It was a confession booth. General Charles Dalton stood in the witness box, not in full military formality now, but in the stripped-back tone of a man speaking as both soldier and survivor. Across the room, Daniel Brooks sat unshackled for the first time, his daughter Bella seated behind him, her small hand resting gently on the back of his chair. She didn't fidget. She didn't speak. She just listened, like this was the bedtime story her father had never dared to tell. Fallujah. April 15th, 2007, Dalton began. We were 2 days into what was supposed to be a clean retrieval of a civilian asset linked to embedded intelligence. But it was a setup. We rolled into an ambush just outside Sector 9. RPGs took out the lead and rear convoys. 6 wounded in the first 2 minutes. 3 dead before the smoke cleared. He paused, his throat tight. I was in the middle Humvee. My radio was dead. My driver was gone. There were enemy snipers posted on every rooftop in a half-click radius. Judge Clarissa Bennett, now visibly shaken, leaned forward. And there was no support. Dalton shook his head. Extraction was 30 minutes out. But we wouldn't make it another 5. He looked toward Daniel, until he showed up. Dalton continued. First came the radio interference clearing, then a whisper on my headset. Spectre 1 eyes on. 6 tangos. Hold position. He turned to the court. We didn't know who Spectre 1 was. He wasn't on our manifest. He wasn't on the mission list. He was deep black off books Tier 1 autonomous overwatch, and he was in position before we even arrived. He held up a grainy photo printed from a classified file, now authorized by the Pentagon for court use. The image showed a single silhouette on a rooftop rifle extended partially camouflaged in rubble. It wasn't Daniel's face. but it was unmistakably his form. 4 minutes. 6 shots. 1 exit path cleared. Clean, bloodless, no civilian injury. Every hostile dropped with a single bullet. Center mass. Dalton placed the photo down with trembling fingers. We walked out of there because of him. The room turned to Daniel as he slowly rose to his feet. His voice, calm but not devoid of emotion, filled the space. I wasn't supposed to be there. He looked at Judge Bennett. I'd gone dark 2 days earlier. Heard chatter. Followed it. Wasn't sanctioned. No medals. No commendations. Just a job I knew needed doing. He exhaled slowly. And when I saw who was in that convoy, I made a decision. He turned toward Dalton. Not because of rank, not because of orders, but because you were a good man, and you were trying to bring someone home. Bennett asked the question the room had been waiting to hear answered. Why didn't you tell anyone during these proceedings? Why stay silent? Daniel didn't hesitate, because this wasn't about Iraq. It wasn't about Fallujah. It was about Bella, about making sure the last thing tied to my past didn't become the thing that defines her future. He paused, looking toward his daughter. I stayed silent to protect her. I've seen what happens to kids when their parents become war stories. They carry medals like scars. I didn't want that for her. He turned back to the judge. I'd rather be misunderstood than let her be raised under my shadow. Bella blinked back tears, her small hand still resting on her father's shoulder. I would have understood, she whispered. Daniel smiled, faint, restrained. You're understanding now. That's all that matters. General Dalton reached into a leather folder and pulled out 2 final items. The first signed debrief report from 2007 confirming Spectre 1's involvement and verifying Daniel Brooks's identity redacted and now unsealed. The second a commendation unsigned and never delivered. For valor, discretion, and above all restraint in the face of unspeakable threat, the Department of Defense recognizes the unnamed operator responsible for the Fallujah Overwatch rescue April 15, 2007. Dalton turned toward Judge Bennett. This is the man they tried to forget. A man who didn't want to be thanked, just left alone. The judge slowly stood, visibly moved. I've sat on this bench for 23 years, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I've ruled on drug cases, custody battles, homicides. But this isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about a nation forgetting the cost of silence. She looked at Daniel. And it's about a father who loved his daughter more than he needed redemption. When Dalton returned to his seat, every head in the room turned toward Daniel, but not with pity. With respect. It wasn't the kind you shout. It was the kind you feel. Even Caleb Dunn, jaw clenched, remained silent. Not out of defeat, but out of recognition. He'd been prosecuting a shadow, and finally realized the man he chased had been guarding them all along. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. The next morning, 10:02 a.m., a courtroom no longer cold, but reverent. The next day, the courthouse filled before the doors even opened. Word had spread quietly, virally, organically. No headlines, no tabloids, just whispers. The man in cuffs saved a general. The ghost from Fallujah has a name. He stayed silent, to protect his daughter. Veterans arrived early. Some drove in from 3 counties away. Others showed up in uniform, though they hadn't worn it in years. They didn't come to protest. They came to witness and to stand. Daniel Brooks entered not in cuffs this time. His olive jacket was still the same, faded, worn. But today the courtroom saw it differently. No longer a relic of isolation. Now, a badge of quiet honor. He walked in alone. No security escort. No lawyer. Only Bella at his side holding his hand. Not out of fear, but pride. She'd always known her father was strong. But today she understood why. General Charles Dalton was already seated, arms crossed, back straight, like he never left the service. He'd stayed overnight in Oak Ridge, declining a military escort or private suite. Instead, he'd slept in a spare room at the VFW hall with the other old soldiers. Felt right, he'd said. He didn't come today to give testimony. He came to say something else. Judge Clarissa Bennett entered her robe, slightly wrinkled her face softer than usual. There was no jury, no stenographer, no bailiff announcement, just her. And the truth. She cleared her throat. This court reconvenes not to retry the facts, but to rectify the silence. She looked at Daniel. In light of newly declassified evidence corroborated eyewitness military testimony and the absence of criminal intent or excessive force, all charges against Mr. Daniel Brooks are dismissed fully and with prejudice. The gavel came down like a benediction, but no one clapped. No one cheered. They simply stood. General Dalton rose from his seat. He didn't approach the bench. He didn't make a speech. Instead, he walked to the center of the room. Slowly. Deliberately. Every eye followed. He stopped 3 feet from Daniel Brooks. Daniel stood still, not blinking. Bella looked up at both men, unsure what was happening, but sensing it mattered. Then Dalton did something that hadn't been seen in that courtroom, or any like it, in years. He removed his cap, stood tall, and gave a full military salute. Not the sharp ceremonial kind, but the slow, deliberate kind you reserve for the man who carried you through fire. A salute not for a superior, but for an equal, a savior. The room went utterly still. A veteran near the back whispered, "My God." Daniel stared at him. At first he said nothing, just like always. But then in one motion, smooth and reverent, he raised his own hand and returned the salute. It wasn't theatrical. It was thank you. It was I remember too. It was, this chapter is over. Bella's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She simply slipped her hand back into her father's. And for the first time in this entire case, Daniel smiled. Not the polite kind, a real one. Small. Earned. In the back of the courtroom, a row of veterans began to rise one by one, placing their hands over their hearts or offering their own salutes. They didn't know Daniel personally, but they knew who he was. The bailiff, unsure of protocol, stood as well. Then Chloe Carter, notebook in her lap, stood and whispered to no one in particular. This isn't a court anymore. It's a cathedral. Outside, Chloe didn't run to her car like the others. She stood by the courthouse steps watching the veterans form a quiet line, not to protest, but to shake Daniel's hand, to thank him, to nod in shared understanding. She opened her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote the first and last sentence of her article. A soldier asked for no applause, told no war stories, and wore no ribbons. Yet today, the entire courtroom stood, because his silence spoke louder than anything else ever could. Later that afternoon, Bella sat beside her father on the courthouse steps, the sun finally breaking through the overcast skies. She looked at him. "So, you're not just a mechanic?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Still am. Just one with more miles." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He looked ahead, then down at her. "Because I didn't want you to love me for what I did. I wanted you to love me for who I am." "I do," she whispered. "Both." And as the courthouse emptied and the last of the onlookers faded into town, one image remained. A single father, a brave daughter, a jacket worn by service, and a salute no one expected. But everyone understood. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. The final session, am. A verdict no longer awaited, but already felt. There was no need for a jury anymore. No bailiff. No media swarm. What remained inside the courtroom was a small gathering of people who had seen something. Most never would not just a legal proceeding, but a reckoning. Judge Clarissa Bennett took her seat, but this time without the distant air of procedural command. Her robe seemed heavier, not from fabric, but from the weight of everything that had transpired. She looked across the room. Fewer faces than before, but more truth than ever. At the defense table, Daniel Brooks sat with Bella beside him. He wasn't handcuffed. He wasn't flanked by guards. Just a father. Just a man. But the room now knew he was never just anything. Judge Bennett held a sheet of paper in her hand. Not a verdict form, not a ruling, but a statement. She glanced up and her eyes found Daniel's. "Mr. Brooks," she began. "This court is tasked not only with interpreting the law, but with weighing its application in the living world, in the complex, often gray space between right and wrong, silence and noise duty and humanity." She paused, letting the words settle. "You chose silence. Not out of contempt for this court, but out of reverence for the weight your words carry. You refused to defend yourself because you didn't believe this place, or perhaps this world, would understand the life you've led. And in doing so, you reminded this court what it, too, often forgets." She stood. "That justice is not process, it is people." She read from the official document, now her voice firm. "Given the new evidence introduced under Pentagon authorization sworn testimony from General Charles Dalton and independent corroboration of military service, the court finds the following: all charges against Daniel Brooks, including misdemeanor assault, resisting arrest, and reckless endangerment, are hereby dismissed with prejudice. No further civil or criminal proceedings shall be pursued in this matter." The gavel hit once. Final. Absolute. A ripple moved through the small audience. No cheers, no applause, just quiet relief. Bella turned to her father and whispered, "It's over." Daniel nodded. Almost. Then came the moment no one expected. Judge Bennett stepped down from the bench, not hurriedly, not for ceremony. She simply descended the steps in silence and stood directly in front of Daniel. A moment passed, then another, and then, in a voice barely audible, "I misjudged you." Daniel looked at her, eyes steady. "You followed the rules. That's your job." Her gaze softened. "No, my job is to see people." "I didn't." She extended her hand. Daniel shook it. Firm, quiet, respectful. Not for her sake, for the system she still served. In the far corner, Caleb Dunn remained seated. His polished shoes didn't move. His notes lay untouched. He had built his case with facts. Cold ones, logic, footage, silence. But what he missed was the one thing that couldn't be filed or cross-examined: character. He approached slowly. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, offering no excuse, only a simple nod. "I was wrong," Daniel replied just as quietly. "You were doing your job." "But I didn't do it well," Caleb admitted. "Not this time." He extended his hand. Daniel looked at it, then slowly accepted. Not to forgive, but to release. Chloe Carter stood by the door, notebook in hand. She had filled every page of it over the past week, a story no editor could have assigned. One she knew would never be just a headline. Her last sentence. The law cleared his name, but it was his daughter who saved his soul. She closed the notebook. Not the story, just this chapter. The courthouse steps were quiet now. No press vans, no cameras, but a few people had gathered. Not protesters, not gawkers, citizens. A mechanic from Daniel's old garage, a teacher from Bella's school, an elderly man with a VFW pin on his hat. They didn't approach. They just nodded as Daniel and Bella walked past. Not in awe, in understanding. As they reached the bottom step, Bella looked up. "Will people still think bad things about you?" Daniel looked toward the sky, pale blue and wide open. "Some might," he said. "But that's not my weight to carry anymore." She smiled. "Can I carry some of it?" Daniel crouched down beside her. You already did. For the first time in weeks, Daniel inhaled fully like a man who'd been holding his breath through memory, judgment, and grief, and exhaled. No medals, no parades, just peace. Oak Ridge County Courthouse. 12:26 p.m. Not guilty, not glorified, just free. The courtroom doors opened, and Daniel Brooks stepped out into the sunlight like a man surfacing from years beneath the water. The sky had cleared, as if the town itself was taking a breath with him. No flashing cameras, no reporters, just light. Air. Silence, the good kind. Bella held his hand, swinging it slightly the way children do when they feel safe again. Her small steps matched his stride for stride. She wasn't holding on because she was afraid. She was holding on because she chose to. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the daughter of someone mysterious, strange, or hard to explain. She felt like the daughter of someone seen. Lining the courthouse steps was something Daniel never expected. A line of men and women, some in uniform, some in plain clothes, most older, some younger, all standing in silence. Veterans, no chants, no signs, just respect. One by one, as Daniel descended the steps, each of them placed a hand over their heart, or raised a slow, quiet salute. The salutes weren't about rank, they were about recognition. Daniel paused halfway down, unsure what to say or do, but Bella tugged gently on his sleeve and whispered, "It's okay. Just keep walking." He nodded, and did. Not with pride, with presence. From across the street, Chloe Carter stood on the sidewalk, camera in hand. She didn't zoom in. She didn't frame it for drama. She waited until Bella looked up at her father, eyes full of joy, hand still in his, and Daniel looked down, lips parting in the smallest, most unguarded smile she had ever seen on him. Click. One photo. One frame. That image would travel farther than any article. It would be shared, reposted, printed, and pinned in coffee shops and veteran halls across the country. Not because it showed a soldier, but because it showed a father. As they passed the old gas station where the whole incident began, Bella looked up and said, "That's where it happened, right?" Daniel nodded. She squinted at the place, the pump, the parking lot, then shrugged. "Doesn't feel big anymore." Daniel smiled. "Because you've gotten braver." "I think we have." They kept walking. A few blocks down near the town's tiny public park, a voice called out, "Brooks." Daniel turned. It was Chuck, his old boss from the auto shop. Hands, oily face red from the sun. "You still know how to rebuild a carburetor?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Depends on who's asking." Chuck walked over, eyes misty, voice low. "I wasn't sure what to believe, but I should have known. You always showed up. Quiet, dependable. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner." Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he extended his hand. "No hard feelings. I was hard to read." Chuck grinned. "Still are." When they arrived at the little rental house at the edge of town, Daniel unlocked the door with the same old key that had once felt like a burden. Today, it felt like belonging. The inside hadn't changed. Same frayed couch, same coffee mug with a chipped rim. But now the silence was no longer heavy. It was restful. Bella ran to the fridge and pulled out a carton of eggs. "I want chocolate chip pancakes." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Middle of the day, she grinned. "You owe me." He grabbed the pan. "Yes, ma'am." As the batter sizzled, Bella pulled out her coloring pencils and began drawing on the back of a grocery list. Daniel glanced over. "What are you working on?" She tilted it toward him. A stick figure with long hair, a green jacket, and a little girl beside him. Above their heads, a giant eagle soared with outstretched wings. "It's us," she said. "But better." Daniel looked at the eagle. "That's a good bird. I used the colors from your keychain." His hand instinctively moved to his pocket, the keychain she had carried all this time. He smiled. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. After dinner, Bella fell asleep on the couch, one arm flung across her dad's lap, breathing deep and even. Daniel sat still for a long while, one hand resting on her back. Then he did something rare. He stood, walked to the small wooden box in his room, the one sealed for over a decade, and opened it. Inside the Delta patch, the old photograph, the unsigned commendation, and the letter from General Dalton. He didn't take them out. He just looked. And then gently, he placed inside one more item, Bella's drawing. Folded. Protected. Precious. Then he closed the box again. But this time, it didn't feel like burying the past. It felt like honoring it. Outside, the wind blew softly. Somewhere down the road, someone would still misunderstand him. But that no longer mattered. Because Daniel Brooks was no longer defined by his silence, nor his scars, nor the shadows of missions never spoken. He was defined by the hand and the warmth of his home, and the fact that, after all these years, he could finally walk free. 1 week later, Veterans Day, Sunday, Oak Ridge Community Chapel. The small chapel near the town square had never seen such a crowd. Veterans Day in Oak Ridge was typically modest. A few flags hung at the town hall, a free breakfast at the VFW, and maybe a wreath at the War Memorial. But this year, the pews were full before the doors even opened. There were no banners, no TV crews, just people. Old, young, quiet, present. They had gathered not to mourn, but to remember. General Charles Dalton stood at the simple wooden lectern, his dress uniform immaculate, but understated. His 4 stars caught the light as he looked out across the crowd. His tone was solemn, but not heavy. "We often speak the names of the fallen on days like this," he began, "and we should. But today, I want to speak the name of someone who lived, someone who chose silence over spectacle humility, over medals, and love over legacy." He paused, letting the weight land gently. "His name is Daniel Brooks." A hush swept over the chapel. Not surprise, just reverence. Dalton continued. "He once saved a convoy from annihilation. He held his fire until every shot mattered. He didn't ask for a commendation. He didn't even want to be found. He returned home not to be honored, but to raise a daughter." He turned, slightly eyes resting on the front row, where Daniel sat, in his faded green jacket. And beside him, Bella, in a neatly pressed, navy blue Junior Cadet Corps uniform, complete with a small eagle pin on her lapel. Dalton unfolded a piece of paper. "This is the commendation that was written for Daniel 15 years ago. It was never delivered. Until today." He read aloud, "For valor in hostile conditions, tactical excellence beyond mission expectation, and unmatched restraint under fire. The United States Army hereby acknowledges Operator Spectre 1, Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks, for actions that preserved life, upheld mission integrity, and honored the silent creed of service." Dalton folded the letter, then looked up. "But no medal could say what his daughter already has. He is a good man." The general stepped down from the podium, walked to the front row, and once again without ceremony, but with deep, deliberate grace, he saluted. Daniel stood, nodded once, and this time returned the salute immediately crisp and proud. The chapel followed, not with applause, but with standing silence. Because some names aren't remembered through noise. They're remembered through what they stood for. After the ceremony, as people mingled outside in the crisp autumn air, Bella was asked if she wanted to say something to the small crowd gathering near the flagpole. She hesitated, then stepped forward, her voice light but steady. My name is Bella Brooks. I'm 11, and I didn't always know what my dad did before I was born. But now I know this. He doesn't just protect people in war. He protects them by being kind, by listening, by staying calm. He fixes things, and he listens even when no one else does. She smiled, looking at her father. I used to think heroes wore capes, but now I think they wear old jackets and carry grocery bags and make pancakes shaped like stars. The crowd chuckled gently, then fell silent again, as if they knew this was the real ending. Chloe Carter was there too, camera around her neck, not as a reporter this time, as a friend. She didn't ask for an interview. She just watched as Daniel leaned down to whisper something into Bella's ear, and Bella giggled just once, just enough. Click. That photo would become her personal favorite. It wouldn't be published. It would be framed, in her office, to remind her of the story that taught her the difference between breaking a story and honoring one. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Daniel and Bella walked down the quiet sidewalk of their neighborhood, the same route they had taken for years. Only now the looks they received weren't cautious or confused. They were respectful, soft, kind. A mailman nodded. A woman watering her lawn waved. A teenage boy paused his bike and said, "Thank you, sir." Daniel said nothing. He just smiled. At the house, Bella kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the couch, humming to herself. Daniel stood by the window for a while, watching the wind rustle the last orange leaves from the trees. He didn't feel the weight anymore. The old wooden box still sat under his bed, now holding not just the shadows of war, but the colors of healing a daughter's drawing a letter finally delivered, and a folded newspaper article with the headline, "The Hero Who Never Asked to Be Named." Months later, in the Department of Defense's updated online database, a new entry appeared in the declassified Veterans Record Archive. Brooks Daniel, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Call. Signed Spectre 1 Operations. Redacted status. Honorably discharged decorations. Service commendation. Delayed delivery notes. Recognition granted post-closure. Public testimony accepted. Known aliases. None. Known legacy: father, neighbor, protector. And underneath the record, just one civilian comment left anonymously. Some names are carved into stone. Others are etched into the hearts of those they quietly saved. We remember both. We remember you, Daniel Brooks. We'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to see more true-to-life tales about honor, family, and quiet strength, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know.